Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing way back in time for a look at something truly fascinating.
Yeah, we are. We're talking about the prayers of the lifting of the hand.
Right. And these aren't just, random scribbles.
No, not at all. This is a specific collection compiled by Leonard W. He worked from cuneiform tablets, mostly from the British Museum.
Okay.
And the real core of it, the bulk of these tablets, they come from Ashurbanipal's royal library.
Ah, Nineveh, 7th century BC, right?
Exactly, around 669 to 625 BC. Though it's worth remembering, the originals, the sources they were copying, were probably Babylonian, older than that.
Ashurbanipal,
Yeah.
what a figure. Talk about preserving history.
Absolutely, a real collector, you could say.
So these prayers of the lifting of the hand, what's the main idea? What were they actually for?
Well, think of them as maybe intimate snapshots, private worship in ancient Mesopotamia.
Private worship.
Yeah. I mean, sure, some were definitely tailored for the king or, specific individuals at really important moments.
Like what kind of moments?
Like seeking safety after a lunar eclipse.
Mm.
We actually have some of Ashurbanipal's own prayers for that. Very specific pleas.
Wow. Okay.
But, a lot of them seem more general. Offering a glimpse into the sort of everyday spiritual concerns people had.
It's incredible, isn't it, to imagine those hopes, those fears, just etched onto clay tablets millennia ago.
It really is.
When you look at these texts, what really jumps out? What's the most striking thing?
For me, it's this blend. It's quite seamless, really.
A blend of what?
Well, on one hand, you have these really lofty spiritual ideas, profound concepts, real yearning.
Okay, the deep stuff.
Right. But then right alongside it, you get these incredibly detailed instructions for offerings, for rituals, for ceremonies.
Oh, the practical side.
Exactly. And woven through all of that is this absolute conviction in the power of words, incantations, magical practices.
So magic and religion weren't separate things.
Not in the way we might think of it now, no. It suggests, I think, that for them, there wasn't this sharp line. Asking a god for help wasn't totally separate from using a specific ritual to, encourage that help.
A more holistic view, maybe?
Yeah, very much so, where the spiritual world and the material world were just deeply, deeply connected in everyday life. It's a perspective maybe we've lost a bit.
So it wasn't just about, whispering a prayer and hoping for the best. There was an active, practical element.
Precisely. You had to do things too. And the language itself, it's very revealing.
How so?
Well, it often sounds a lot like penitential psalms. From other cultures in the region, people crying out, asking for forgiveness for sins.
Okay, familiar themes there.
Very. But mixed in with that is this really urgent need for protection against sorcery, against curses, black magic, basically.
Right, so dangers from, both divine anger and human malice.
Exactly. It paints this picture of a world where threats could come from, anywhere. Seen and unseen, you had to be prepared.
Okay, let's dig into the title itself. Prayers of the Lifting of the Hand. It's such a strong image. What's behind that phrase?
It is a powerful image, isn't it? And we actually see it. On cylinder seals, you find these depictions of people praying.
And their hands are raised?
Yes, hands raised. It's a clear gesture of prayer, of supplication, reaching out to the divine, maybe showing submission.
A posture you see across cultures, really.
It seems universal, yes. So that's the literal meaning, the physical act.
I mean, you said that might be more to it.
Well, yeah. Based on some of the notes the scribes added at the end of the tablets, the colophons, it seems, lifting of the hand, might have also been used more broadly.
How so?
As just a general term for prayer, or maybe even incantation.
Ah, okay. So the title could mean both the action and the type of text itself.
Exactly. It's got layers, hints at the ritual, but also the overall purpose.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned these aren't like, say, the Maklu or Shirpu series, which are neatly numbered. So how were these tablets organized? Was it just chaos?
Not quite chaos, but definitely not that kind of rigid, numbered system. The Maklu and Shirpu series, those were specific collections, often for dealing with, witchcraft or bad omens. Very focused.
Right.
The prayers of the lifting of the hand seem to be more like a category, a class of text, recognizable by its style, its content.
But surely they tried to group them somehow. There must have been some kind of order.
Oh, for sure. There's evidence they tried. We find things called catch lines.
Catch lines.
Yeah, where the first line of the next tablet in a potential series is written at the bottom of the current one. Kind of like a continued on next page thing.
Clever. Did it work?
Well, interestingly, very few of the catch lines we find actually match up with the first lines of other existing tablets in this collection. So maybe the series got broken up, or maybe our collection is incomplete.
Okay. What other clues are there?
We see duplicates. The same prayer appearing on multiple tablets. That suggests maybe thematic grouping.
Makes sense.
And then, crucially, we have actual labels on some tablets. They explicitly say this tablet belongs to a larger series.
Oh, really? Like what?
Like one is marked no one of a series. Another says it's get this, the 134th tablet of some other collection. And another is labeled as the 8th part of something called Bit Salami.
Whoa. 134th tablet. So these prayers could be part of much bigger works.
It certainly looks that way.
Yeah.
These larger series were probably composite, meaning they likely included all sorts of different texts, not just these prayers of the lifting of the hand. Finding one prayer in the series doesn't automatically mean all the other tablets were the same type.
Right. It paints a picture of, like, a whole library system with different sections and categories.
Exactly. A much richer context than just isolated prayers.
Okay, so who was doing all this organizing? Who are the people behind copying and arranging these texts?
Well, the scribes, specifically the scribes working for King Ashurbanipal, he was, as we said, really into knowledge preservation.
His library project.
Right. So his scribes were busy copying texts, arranging them. And the source material they used, it was almost certainly older. Babylonian texts, mostly.
And they just copied them word for word.
Probably not always. There's evidence they were re-editing these older collections, adapting them perhaps.
Re-editing. That's interesting. What sort of changes might they have made? Were they adding commentary or just tidying things up?
It's hard to say for sure, but we get hints. There's this fascinating Assyrian catalog, basically a list of incantations found on a tablet fragment.
Okay.
Some of the first lines listed in that catalog, they match cache lines and first lines from our collection of prayers.
Ah, so a connection.
Yes. But other incantations in that same catalog, ones addressed to the sun god Amish, for instance, they don't seem to connect to the prayers of the lifting of the hand at all.
So the scribes were maybe pulling from different sources, grouping things in new ways.
It looks like it. Maybe they were curating, selecting texts, organizing them based on new criteria for Ashurbanipal's library. Not just passive copying, but actively shaping the collection.
Like librarians or editors today, in a way.
Kinda, yeah. And speaking of the library context, you mentioned a warning earlier. Something on the tablets.
Ah, yes, the colophons again. Many of these tablets have this sort of standard closing note.
Like a copyright notice.
Sort of, but with more divine wrath involved. Ashurbanipal often had his scribes add a note declaring his dedication to preserving knowledge. He even boasts a bit about his wisdom.
Okay.
But the key part is the curse. A really potent curse, calling on the gods, Sarambo to punish anyone who steals the tablet, damages it, or even, erases his name and writes their own.
Wow. Serious stuff. Don't mess with the king's library.
Pretty clear message, right? Shows how valuable they thought this knowledge was.
Absolutely. Were all the colophons the same?
No, there were variations. Some are much shorter. One just says it was copied from an older original, nothing about curses. And interestingly, the tablets that seem to be just single prayer extracts, maybe copied quickly for a specific immediate need, they usually don't have any colophon at all.
Ah, so the note itself tells you something about the tablet's purpose? A library copy versus a user copy, maybe?
Exactly. It adds another layer. Okay, let's shift focus to the prayers themselves. Who are they talking to? Which gods and goddesses pop up?
Oh, a whole pantheon. It seems pretty clear that individuals often had a personal patron deity.
Their go-to god.
Sort of, yeah. A specific god or goddess they felt a special connection with. Then, of course, you had the main city gods. Each city had its patron, and they'd be a major focus locally.
Makes sense.
And there are even hints that maybe different jobs, different social classes might have had their own specific deities they prayed to more often.
So a god for everyone and everything.
It feels a bit like that. It's a truly polytheistic worldview reflected here.
Can you give us some names? Who are the big players in these prayers?
Sure. You see a lot of prayers to Sin, the moon god. He seems very important. And his consort, Ningal. Ishtar, of course, a goddess of love, war, fertility, a real major figure. She appears frequently.
A powerhouse.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Then you have the big names like Baal, who's often identified with Marduk, the patron god of Babylon, and Zagiar, who's a bit mysterious, the god of dreams.
God of dreams, interesting. Who else?
Lots. Amash, the sun god, very important for justice. Ninib, Bao, Ea, the god of wisdom and magic, and his consort Damkina. Nabu, the god of scribes, and his wife Tashmitu. Nergal, god of the underworld, even specific astral deities like Coxity.
Wow, quite the list.
And sometimes they didn't pray to just one. We find prayers addressed to whole groups, like all the gods of Baal and Akur.
A divine council, almost. It really drives home how central the gods were to their world.
Absolutely. Permeated everything.
And you mentioned earlier it wasn't just words. There were detailed instructions for ceremonies, for offerings. What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Yes, the detail is amazing. Very specific ritual actions were needed alongside the words. The offerings covered a huge range.
Yep.
Incense, first off, called SANA. Various oils, sometimes specific types, are mentioned. Drink offerings were common. Beer, which they called KAS, sag, mead, plain water, even a special drink made from corn or grain.
Okay, standard ritual fare so far.
Right, but it goes on. Honey, butter, different kinds of seeds. There's one called the mastical plant. Other plants too, like bumu, tamnu, upuntu.
Plants and seeds.
Even things like plaster fragments from a wall. And valuable stuff too, like gold. Specific kinds of wood feature heavily, like uru wood, dates naturally, a herb or cereal called Kuatir, and something called taranu, described as having a pleasant smell.
Goodness, it highlights how tangible, how material their connection to the divine could be.
So how were these things actually used in the rituals?
Again, the texts often give specific directions. Seeds might be thrown into oil. Oil might be put in special vessels with other items. Liquids poured out as libations.
Libations, right?
Sometimes they even specify amounts. And the timing could be crucial, too. Like performing the ritual at a certain time.
Exactly. Some had to be done at night, others on a favorable day, whatever that meant, astrologically, perhaps. Some were tied to phases of the moon. One even mentions waiting until the wind is blowing from a particular direction.
Wow. So specific? Were they all like that? Restricted timing?
No, it seems many weren't. A lot of these prayers and rituals could probably be performed whenever needed, but the ones with timing instructions really show how carefully orchestrated it could be.
So it was this combination, the right words, the right materials, the right actions, sometimes even the right time, all working together.
Precisely, and they believed it worked. These ceremonies weren't just symbolic niceties. They were thought to have real power, real potency.
The ritual itself mattered as much as the prayer.
Absolutely. Getting the incantation right was vital, yes. But so was following every step of the ceremony perfectly. We see descriptions of setting up an incense burner, an adaguru, offering the livings, heaping up the dates just so, sprinkling pure water, using those specific woods and oils.
It sounds very involved.
It could be. Even repeating the incantation a set number of times, often 3 times. And there's this intriguing mention of unloosing the knotted cord.
Knotted cord, what's that about?
It likely refers to sympathetic magic, the idea that symbolically untying a knot could help release the person from the grip of sin or illness or a curse. Binding and loosing were common magical concepts.
Fascinating. It really emphasizes the practical, almost technical side of their religion.
Very much so. Belief in action.
So moving to the content of the prayers themselves. Beyond protection from sorcery, what were people actually asking for? What were their hopes and fears?
Oh, a whole spectrum of human experience, really. You find prayers asking for righteousness, for ethical guidance, asking the gods to set them on a good path in life.
Seeking guidance.
Yeah, and asking for good dreams, propitious dreams. As we mentioned, deliverance from sin was a big one, from evil influences generally, and from spells and diseases. Those often seemed linked in their minds.
Illness as a result of sin or magic.
Often, yes, or divine displeasure. Remember Ashurbanipal praying during the lunar eclipse. That's about averting perceived danger from the heavens.
Right, so dealing with internal issues, like sin, but also external threats, seen and unseen.
Exactly. And then there were the more positive requests, too. Prayers for long life, for good health, for children, for progeny, for just general divine favor, good fortune.
The big life goals?
Pretty much. Some prayers actually ask for divine judgment, like sort out this dispute for me. Others are very focused on healing, on removing sickness from the body.
Directly asking for health.
Yes. And interestingly, sometimes the reason for the prayer was a dream they'd had. Maybe a disturbing dream they wanted protection from, or one they needed help interpreting.
So dreams were taken very seriously.
Very. Ultimately, though, what you see again and again are these direct, often quite emotional appeals. Asking the gods for help, for mercy, for intervention. It's incredibly human, incredibly relatable when you strip it down. These are worries and hopes we still understand today.
It really is humbling. Echoes across thousands of years. What about the style? The language they used? Was it very formal or poetic?
It varies. You do find occasional hints of meter, a rhythmic quality to some lines. But generally, they don't seem to follow strict poetic rules like, say, epic poetry might.
More functional, perhaps.
Perhaps. And they definitely use a specialized vocabulary, words related specifically to magic, to ritual. Some of these terms are actually explained in the vocabulary section of King's book, which is helpful.
Can you give an example?
Sure. We see Akkadian words like surtu, which means iniquity or sin. Tashiltu can mean a divine decision or judgment. Nindabu is a general word for an offering. We mentioned Adaguru for the incense burner. It's like a technical language for talking to the gods and performing these rites.
A sacred lexicon, almost.
You could put it that way, yeah. A specific toolkit for that spiritual purpose.
Okay, so pulling it all together now, what are the main takeaways? What do these prayers of the lifting of the hand tell us overall about Babylonian and Assyrian beliefs?
I think the biggest thing is how deeply intertwined everything was. Spiritual devotion, what we'd call religious feeling, wasn't separate from what we might label magic or ritual practice. It was all part of the same system.
One integrated worldview.
Exactly. There was this profound belief that divine powers were active in the world, constantly influencing things. And alongside that, an equally strong belief that humans could and should interact with those powers through specific actions, prayers, offerings, incantations.
To seek favor and protection.
Absolutely. Appeasing the gods, getting them on your side, and protecting yourself from bad stuff, whether it was divine anger, bad luck, illness, or outright sorcery that was paramount. It's crystal clear from these texts.
And it feels quite personal, too.
Very much so. While some prayers are clearly official or for the king, many feel deeply personal. They really underline that individuals felt they had a direct line, or at least could attempt one, to the divine. It wasn't always mediated through priests or temples, even though those were important too. This was about personal piety, personal need.
So a world where prayer and ritual were seen as genuine, active ways to engage with reality, both spiritual and material, not just wishful thinking.
Precisely. They were tools for navigating life.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, a real deep dive into the prayers of the lifting of the hand. It feels like we've peeled back layers of time and got a much clearer picture of that ancient world.
Yeah, they really offer this vivid glimpse into the religious, the magical world of the Babylonians and Assyrians. It's a complex system, Worship, ritual, belief in supernatural forces, all woven together.
And what stands out is that blend, like you said, the high-minded spiritual stuff right next to the very practical, step-by-step ritual instructions.
And those deeply personal cries for help. It really shows a worldview where gods and humans were in constant dialogue, constant interaction, where words mattered, but so did actions, so did materials.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? This ancient mix of, well, lofty prayer and hands-on magic. What does that tell us about just the basic human need? The need to find meaning, find solace, but also maybe find some control when facing the unknown, both back then and maybe even now. Are there echoes of that same duality, that blend in our lives today, maybe in ways we don't always consciously acknowledge?
That's a really interesting question to ponder. It connects us, doesn't it, across all that time? Because, this deep dive, it's really only scratched the surface. These texts are incredibly rich.
Absolutely. So if you listening found this intriguing, we definitely encourage you to explore more, dig into the history, the texts of ancient Mesopotamia. There's just so much more waiting to be discovered.
A whole world of insights.
Thank you for joining us here on The Deep Dive.